So I guess I will start by saying I am an applied linguist, and I do work largely on multilingualism, world languages, world language classrooms, but I welcome questions from other fields. I come from a chemistry background, actually. My bachelor's and my first master's degree is in chemistry and chemistry education. So that's kind of why I'm into action research, because it brings other ideas into the world language classroom. So I'm going to be talking about linguistic landscape sort of as a tool for bringing action-based activities into the language classroom. I do work at Michigan State University. I'm in a global Fulbright right now. And right now I am at the University of Graz. So that's just a little bit. Who am I? I said I'm an applied linguist. I work in second language acquisition, multilingualism, and heritage language acquisition. I work in a Spanish and second language studies department, so I kind of tow two worlds constantly. And I am a heritage speaker myself. My mother is from Argentina, so I grew up in a bilingual household, which gives you a little bit of an idea as to why I'm interested in all of this stuff. And I'm a language learner myself. So I have studied Greek, I've studied ASL, I've studied other Romance languages. I know how to count to 12 in German as of a week and a half ago, so little by little. So that's a bit about me. For my Fulbright research, I started in Buenos Aires in Argentina. Then I moved on to Thessaloniki, Greece, and now I am in Graz, looking at, in a nutshell, one question in particular: how can we use linguistic landscape as a pedagogical tool to really motivate language learners in community-based, student-led participatory action projects? So what is linguistic landscape? And you talked about this a little bit before. It looks at what's going on in the community in the language. So this could be written language, like banners, graffiti, you talked about that a little bit, ads and advertisements. I like that you mentioned t-shirts, so that's in our public spaces also. Protest chants, I've only been here for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, so I haven't seen any protests yet in Austria. I don't know if it's really a thing. I can tell you in Greece and in Argentina, it's definitely a thing. So lots of protest chants. What are we hearing, right? What are we hearing in public spaces? So the aim is really to look at socio-political ideas, ideologies, these kinds of thoughts and standards, so to speak, that people think are standards, right? In the community, ideas that are really obvious in the community or maybe absent, right? It helps us acknowledge what's missing that maybe we thought would be there or should be there within a community. So this is an example on the left. From Chinatown in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and it's a sign outside of a Japanese sushi shop, and you can see it's in English. Now this is a Spanish majority community, right, region, in Chinatown for a Japanese restaurant, and yet it's in English with a little bit, right, of their language in the middle. So what's going on here? Who do we see as having the power in this community? Who's the audience most of the time in this community, right? We can also see the street signs on the right are also, they're bilingual, they're in Spanish and in Chinese. So just to give a brief example, and I have, here we go, some others. So this is graffiti taken during COVID. COVID had just started in Washington, D.C., where I was living. And this was in a tunnel. It says, porque también somos lo que hemos perdido. We have lost. So I'm going to engage you a little bit. Who do you think might be present in this community? What does this tell us? Nobody. Community is absent of people. Spanish speakers, right? Spanish, yeah, this is in Washington, D.C., but we see Spanish in the community. Anybody who speaks Spanish might see that it's sort of slang text use of the language, right? So maybe this tells us about a certain, right, kind of Spanish speaker from a certain community saying, hey, we're here. And it also talks about the past, right? It's also what we have lost. So we also start to see, what does this community care about? Where do they come from, maybe? So it really gives us insight into who's present in a community. We can look at who is underrepresented or undervalued, right? What's missing in this community that we thought would be here? Who holds the power? Any inequities between communities of people. We can look at social movements. Again, I've only been in Austria for a week and a half, but I could tell you that in the US, you would see BLM, Black Lives Matter, right? You would see that as a social movement, depending on where you are. Cultural traditions and the needs of a community. So we can look at what language resources exist, what language accessibility right, is present in a community. Language education, lots of other things. Public health, for example. Is there language accessibility relating to public health in a community? We can also affect and have an impact on a linguistic landscape. So here in the upper left corner, I don't know if you can see it too well, but it has, I think it's, what is it? 15 different languages, and this is on the bus system in Honolulu in Hawaii. I should say on Oahu, on the entire island. And this is an emergency messaging booklet on the bus system. So in theory, if anybody's on the bus and an emergency happens, and somebody is there who maybe does not speak or read English, you would be able to communicate with them on what's going on. You would be able to help get any services that they might need, right? But this is telling anybody that gets on the bus, hey, we see you, we know you're here. This is on the upper right, keiki, meaning child or offspring in Hawaiian. And this is on Waikiki Beach. Has anybody been to Hawaii? Yeah, okay, cool. So this is a very touristy area, right? People go to surf and sunbathe and go to the beach. But this is the government, the people's way of saying, hey, there's a community here before you got here. We're not just about surfing. We're not just about getting your shave ice, right? There's another language that's here. And this is a way of reminding people about it in a very touristy, tourist central area. So we can affect it to recognize people. We can use the linguistic landscape to respect people, to motivate people maybe to take action, hopefully. We can celebrate different communities, different languages, and we can use it to educate people on maybe what's absent or what's present that they didn't know about. So within the foreign language classroom or the world language classroom, bless you, we can see that that linguistic landscape can be used as a tool, as a pedagogical tool, to really encourage language learning in different ways. So we can look at language development, grammar, vocab, syntax, pragmatic ability, socio-political awareness. We can look at cultural knowledge and cultural connection to a community that maybe students, you all mentioned, maybe the books that we're using in the classroom aren't really drawing attention, right, to the things that we want to draw attention to. So this is a good way that we can do that. This is a sign in New York City, where I am originally from, outside of the public library. And it says service center in many different languages, communicating to anybody who walks by that at least reads these languages, so you do have to be literate, that in theory you can walk into this place and you will have resources offered to you in this language, right? So this is how we can communicate to people, but also how we can engage language learners of these languages, right? To see, okay, what can we do? What other accessible things can we give to a community? Okay. Oopsie, did I miss something? Yeah. So these are some other examples from my time this year. You can see I work on bilingualism, multilingualism, language learning, so I'm looking at signs that contain more than one language. You wouldn't have to, but that's what I do, so that's what I'm going to show you. In the upper right, anybody working with primary school students? Okay, we have a few. So this is to show that it doesn't have to be super complex, right? Linguistic landscape can be really simple. If you look at the upper right-hand corner, this is on bibimbap, a very kind of common cultural dish in Korean, and it shows the ingredients in this dish in Spanish and in Korean. And this is at the Korean Cultural Center in Buenos Aires. So what does that mean? It means that primary students who are maybe just learning basic vocabulary, right, around food can still affect a linguistic landscape, right, in a really kind of beginner, basic kind of way. You can also get very complex. Here is a sign in New York City on the subway talking about planned changes, right? So if you don't speak English or read English, right, you're kind of screwed if the sign is only in English, right? But it's in different languages, meaning that anybody that does read these other languages now knows that, okay, Friday night, I can't take my train to my stop. I'm gonna have to find another way home or get home earlier, right? This can be really important for different communities, right? So critical linguistic landscape. Now that's what I'm really interested in. What does critical mean? Anybody wanna shout out any ideas, words that you relate with critical?
Important.
Okay.
Essential.
Essential? Anyone else? Yeah, important, essential. The things that are difficult to talk about, right? Immigration Inclusive language, pronouns, right? We talk about that a lot. Gender neutral language in many different languages. Climate change, public health, race and ethnicity. We have a lot of these topics that are difficult to communicate to other people, but also kind of hard to know what our own opinions are about them sometimes. So we call these critical, right? So the critical linguistic landscape can really help students in their target language to be able to talk about topics that they're already talking about. They're already talking about them at pretty much any age, to talk on real life, community-centered things that are relevant to their communities in their target languages. And we've seen it being used in all contexts. So it's great because you can use it for all different ages, different languages, different places of the world, different regions, right? Sorry, we're waiting for it to, there we go. So these are some examples of what I mean by critical linguistic landscape, looking for these kinds of sensitive topics in the world around us. So up on the upper right, this was a group of LGBTQ artists in Argentina, right? Drawing attention to their community. Hey, we're here, right? Let's see. In the middle, these are signs in New York about health insurance, right? Healthcare, health insurance in Chinese and in Spanish. So saying, hey, this is how you can get access to this if you do not speak or read English. You can still get access to this. I think it's a little bit, yeah, we have the gender neutral up here, women's rights. So there's a lot of different ways that we can start to see, right, this critical linguistic landscape that, again, especially secondary and university students are already talking about them. Lots of them are on campuses, especially in the last couple of weeks, right, protesting and talking about certain topics. So how do we bring that into the world language classroom? How do we help them to be able to communicate these things in their target language? So this is what I'm asking this year. How can we use linguistic landscape for student-led, community-led projects? And so I use participatory action research, participatory meaning that teachers and students are participating, right? It's not just a researcher stepping into a classroom, asking a question, doing some interviews, and saying, thanks a lot, bye-bye, right? Students and teachers have a voice and they decide, what are we gonna do? Action, meaning that we're gonna do something. We're not just going to write an essay about it, right? We're going to take some sort of action within our community. And research meaning that, okay, we are actually exploring something. So what are we looking at? What do we see that's critical in our community? Maybe in our school, maybe on our block, could be lots of different contexts, but we are asking some sort of question of how can we engage with people, by people, with people. So in a nutshell, participatory action research is community-led, and in my specific context of the world language classroom, it's also student-led. So those are kind of the two really central ideas. I'm gonna give an example of a project that we did in Argentina when I started my whole kind of world tour. And so this was in a in Buenos Aires, Argentina. This was a pre-K through pre-service teaching level school. So if you can imagine being in the same school as 3-, 4-year-olds and people who are training to be teachers, right? Everybody in that age range, in that training range, in that proficiency range is in this one building. So pretty special place to be able to do this work. They worked on Spanish, English, and French, so the teacher trainers were training to teach all of these different languages from lots of different bilingual backgrounds. And what I really worked on, I worked with the teachers, but I worked with them in their classrooms. So we were really looking at how do we work with your students who were secondary students between the ages of 14 and 18. And this is a bulletin board at the school in different languages, since it is a language-based school. Kind of like from anybody from the US, kind of like a charter school, sort of. Not really private, not entirely public, but kind of somewhere in the middle. So we went in and we gave them a task. Half of them were tasked with going through the school. These are 14 to 18-year-olds. We kept them in the building. You don't have to, but we did. So we kept them in the building and we said, look for signs that are in languages besides Spanish, right, the majority language. And then the other half, look for things that are only in Spanish. And think about, where's this signage posted or written? What information does it give? Who's the audience, right? What does this maybe tell us? And then they shared it out. So they shared with each other, what did you find? You know, I was looking for just Spanish, you were looking for other languages. And they saw, well, wait a minute. We're learning all these different languages. We speak all these different languages, but most of our signs are in Spanish in the school. Some are in English, but not so many. And the English was mainly in the bathrooms and graffiti. So what is this saying, right, about what the students care about and what's actually presented in the school? So we decided, okay, we're gonna take action. And they decided they were going to add, in this case, to the multilingual linguistic landscape of their school. So then they asked, okay, well, what do we care about? We're not just gonna put up signs that are translated, right, from one language to another. And they came up with different topics that they cared about. This was during elections in Argentina. And they thought, okay, a lot talked about political corruption, a lot talked about women's rights, climate change was a big one, animal welfare, especially for the younger secondary students, and mental health and well-being, cyberbullying, for example. And this is some of what they produced. So on the far left, I get turned around, you know. On the far left, a commentary, right, on the elections that were about to happen. Here on the bottom left, women's rights and women representation in sports. Here again, women's rights and female empowerment. Adopt, don't shop, right? And then a commentary on environmentalism. So their only prompt was that they had to use at least one word in English. It was an English language course, just one word. And look at everything that they produced, right? So the important part I want to highlight is not so much that they use the target language in this kind of project in the actual production, right? Because their community might not speak English, even if they're learning English. Maybe that's not the language that's going to reach the community. So for our classroom, we decided, okay, just one word. And you can see, let's see in some others. So here, this one might be my favorite, although I didn't tell them that. But breaking news is the only part that's in English, right? And this was a commentary on one of the candidates. But this would certainly be something that the community would have access to, right? But then they presented them. They presented on what they designed in their target language in English. And then they wrote a written reflection. So it still gives a chance, even if they're using a different language, to really use their target language and practice it in the language classroom. These are some others, recycling. We had some artists in the group. So I don't know if you can see it, but it says, slowly kill yourself, and it's a cigarette, right, with the skull. So they got really creative with this. They were really excited to show about it, right? And this was them posting them around the school. We got the principal's okay to put them up wherever they wanted. And in the middle here, they had made a poster commenting on women's rights relating to the elections. Any guesses as to what that door leads to, where they're putting their poster up? Men's bathroom. Yeah, so they were able to put it wherever they wanted. Their teacher said, maybe not in the men's bathroom. They really wanted to, though. So they said, okay, we'll put it outside the men's bathroom so that any man, in theory, who goes in or out of this bathroom now is seeing the sign, right, which is a very big commentary on, hey, this is what happens if you vote, right, and not voting in this election can have real implications. So that's just a couple of examples. So what did students say? Well, they felt empowered. They felt for one of the first times for a lot of them that they actually had a voice, right, in their language classroom, and a voice in their target language. For them, that was English. They felt more curious about using English, but also about social ideas and social ideologies, right? And all these kinds of concepts that they didn't necessarily get to talk about in the language classroom so much. Curiosity about also hearing the opinions of their peers. And they felt more motivated and very proud. They were super proud to stand up with their posters and put them around the school. So what I've been working on this year is building materials and resources for teachers to be able to do this in the classroom. For older students who can deal with some technical language, linguistic landscape, talking about linguistic landscape, what does that mean? And for younger learners, talking about the languages around us. It's the same thing, it's just a technical language that's a little bit different, and working on teacher guides. So that's my time in Austria, working on teacher guides. So just a couple of comments, I think, on adapting this for your own classroom. Things to consider: how many classes can you dedicate to something like this? Are there any linguistic parts that you need to include on vocab? Maybe you need to include them in a pre-task to support your students. What proficiency are your students at? Can you be a little bit more complex and deal with more complex ideas? And are you prepared yourself to deal with some complex ideas? The teachers and I in Argentina were comfortable dealing with political concepts and discussions, but some people might not be, right? So if you're not prepared, that's okay. You can still guide students, right, to work on other things. And will there be any kind of at-home component? So context, basically, think about your own context. And I would encourage you, even if you're not in the world language classroom, to think about how can you incorporate this to connect, the community and your students. So here are just a couple more examples. This is at the University of Graz on, hygiene, basically, right? Washing hands. It's in English, in the English building. But it's super useful, right? Because of the pictures that are included, I can have a visual, and it's fairly intermediate language use, right? So pretty, not too complex for somebody who's learning English would be able to either read this sign or produce this sign, right? This is a sign from Washington, D.C., where I live, and it talks about free care kits. Right? But Washington, D.C. is very multilingual. So I hope you don't need a care kit if you don't read English, because you might not know that you have access to one, right? So for example, here, students might be able to produce posters, right? Talking about what access do people have to different kinds of care in their community. And this, it's a little grainy when it's this big, but that's okay. So this was actually an action project that came out of a work with teachers and pre-service teachers. And long story short, we ended up starting a podcast on being from bilingual homes, people from bilingual homes. So if you're a podcast listener, this was one outcome of an action project that I know a lot of young students are interested in podcasts and YouTubing and TikToking, right? So something to think about. So I will leave it there. Thank you. Caristo, gracias, danke.